Dad, you don't understand anything about real business. My son's future daughter-in-law said it with a smile that was just a little too sharp. Not loud, not angry, just sarcastic enough that everyone at the table heard it. I didn't argue. I just smiled and waited, because sometimes the smartest thing an old man can do is stay quiet and let people show you exactly who they are. The dinner was at a place called Riverside Grill in Des Moines, Iowa. Tuesday night, 6:40 p.m. My son Daniel had insisted on it. "Dad, you'll like her," he said on the phone 2 days earlier. "She's ambitious." Ambitious. That word means different things depending on how old you are. When I was 30, ambition meant working 16-hour days and eating cold sandwiches in a warehouse office. When you're 62, ambition often means watching someone younger try to skip the 20 years of hard parts. I got to the restaurant 10 minutes early. Old habit. I ordered black coffee and watched the river through the window. It was early October. Cold wind on the water. Leaves turning orange along the banks. I remember thinking the place smelled like grilled onions and lemon cleaner. Daniel arrived first. My son was 32. Tall like his mother, nervous like me. He hugged me. "Dad, relax," he said. "You look like you're about to meet a bank auditor." "I usually like bank auditors," I said. He laughed. Then she arrived. Emily Carter, 30 years old. Sharp gray blazer. Phone in her hand. Confidence in every step. She didn't walk into the restaurant. She entered it. You know the type. People who act like every room is already theirs. Daniel stood up quickly. "Emily, this is my dad." She shook my hand with the kind of firm grip they teach in business schools. "Nice to finally meet you, Mr. Turner. Call me Frank." Her smile stayed professional. "Frank." We sat. Menus opened. Drinks ordered. Small talk began. The usual things. "Where did you grow up? What do you do? How long have you been in Des Moines?" Emily talked easily. She worked in commercial real estate development. Her company flipped older industrial properties into modern mixed-use business spaces. That's the fancy phrase. In normal English, it means buying cheap buildings, renovating them, and selling them to tech startups for 3 times the price. I listened and nodded, because I've spent 40 years in business, and the first rule is simple. Let people talk. They'll tell you everything. About 20 minutes into dinner, Daniel mentioned my work. "Dad owned a logistics company," he said proudly. Owned. Past tense. "I sold Turner Freight Solutions 6 years ago. 43 trucks. 2 warehouses. 37 employees. Sold the whole thing for $8.6 million. After taxes, investments, and a few mistakes, I still had enough to live comfortably." But Emily didn't know that. She tilted her head slightly. "Oh," she said, not impressed, just polite. "What kind of logistics?" "Regional freight," I said. "Mostly agricultural transport." She nodded slowly, like a teacher acknowledging a student's answer. Then she took a sip of wine. "Well," she said, "that's interesting." Daniel kept talking. "Dad started it with 1 truck. That must have been a long time ago," Emily said. Her tone was light, but I caught the edge underneath. 1984, I said. She blinked. "That's before container optimization systems were even widely used." I smiled. "We used paper maps." She laughed softly, like I had just told a cute story about rotary phones. Dinner arrived. Steaks, potatoes, salad. The conversation shifted to Emily's current project. A large redevelopment deal. Old manufacturing building. 6-story structure. Downtown district. Total project value is around $22 million, she said. Daniel looked proud. I nodded. "That's a big renovation." Emily leaned forward slightly. "We're bringing in private investors and a commercial bank line." She spoke fast, confident, the way people do when they want you to know they're important. Then she looked at me again. "You probably didn't deal with financing structures like that in trucking." And that's when it happened. Daniel tried to change the subject, but Emily continued. "Dad, you don't understand anything about real business." She said it lightly, but the table went quiet. Even the waiter paused for a moment. Daniel looked horrified. Emily. She waved a hand casually. I mean, no offense, she said. It's just, modern development deals are complicated. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that expects agreement. I took a sip of coffee. Black, hot, and then I smiled back. You're probably right, I said. Her shoulders relaxed. Daniel looked confused. But the moment passed. Dinner continued. On the drive home that night, I kept thinking about one thing. Not what she said, but how she said it. You see, arrogance leaves fingerprints. Small ones. In tone. In timing. In the way someone assumes the game is already won. And I've spent 4 decades around negotiations, contracts, and investors. You learn to notice when someone is bluffing, or when someone believes their own story a little too much. 3 days later, Daniel called me. Dad, Emily might reach out to you. Why? She needs a favor. I almost laughed, but I didn't. What kind of favor?
A signature.
Silence sat between us for a moment. A signature for what? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Something involving the old Turner Freight warehouse property. Now that surprised me, because that building was still legally in my name, and apparently, Emily's $22 million deal depended on it. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Emily again. This time not at a restaurant, but in a conference room. Glass walls, polished table, architectural drawings spread across the surface. She looked different, still confident, but a little less relaxed, because this time, she knew exactly who she was sitting across from, and she needed something from me, a single signature. Without it, her biggest deal would collapse. She slid a contract toward me. Frank, she said carefully, we'd really appreciate your cooperation. I didn't open the folder yet. Instead, I leaned back in the chair, smiled again, and for the first time since that dinner, I asked a question. So, I said, tell me about this $22 million project. Emily began explaining. Numbers, investors, construction schedules, permits, all very impressive. But while she talked, I noticed something, a small detail in the documents, a name, one I recognized immediately, and in that moment, I realized 2 things. First, Emily didn't understand nearly as much about business as she thought. And second, this situation was about to become very educational for her. Very educational. I closed the folder slowly, looked up, and smiled again. I didn't sign anything that day, not even close. Instead, I closed the folder, pushed it gently back toward Emily, and said the most useful sentence in business. I'll review this. Her smile tightened just a little. How long do you think that will take? She asked. I shrugged. A few days. She nodded, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. Deals like hers move fast. Banks, investors, contractors, they all run on deadlines. Miss one and the dominoes start falling. Daniel tried to smooth things over. Dad's careful, he said. That's good, Emily replied. But the way she said it sounded more like, that's inconvenient. We shook hands. I walked out of the building with a leather folder under my arm and a strange little feeling in my stomach. Not anger. Not exactly. More like curiosity. Because when you've spent 40 years reading contracts and people, you develop a kind of instinct. And something about that deal smelled wrong. Not rotten. Just rushed. Like someone had stacked a lot of cards very quickly and hoped nobody would breathe too hard. Back home that evening, I poured a glass of bourbon and opened the folder at my kitchen table. The house was quiet. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to funeral. After 40 years together, silence becomes a very loud thing. So I read slowly. Page 1. Development Partnership Agreement. Page 2. Property Acquisition Structure. Page 3. Investment Waterfall. All very polished. Very professional. But then I reached page 9. And there it was. A small line most people would skip right over. Access easement contingent upon cooperation of adjacent property owner. adjacent property owner. The building sat exactly next to Emily's redevelopment site, which meant her project needed road access through my land for construction trucks and utility lines. Without that easement, her permits would stall. And without permits, the bank wouldn't release financing. I leaned back in the chair, took a slow sip of bourbon, and then I noticed something else. A name, right under the investment partners. Langford Capital. Now that made me smile, because 15 years ago, Langford Capital tried to buy my company for $2.1 million. I said no. 2 years later, they came back offering $3 million. Still no. Eventually, I sold to someone else for nearly triple that. Langford had a reputation. Aggressive investors. Not dishonest, but very comfortable pushing the edge of contracts. I closed the folder, and I did something Emily probably didn't expect. I started calling old friends. The first call was to Martin Alvarez. Martin had been my lawyer for 20 years. He answered on the third ring. "Frank, you old bastard," he said. "Nice to hear from you too," I replied. "What trouble are you in?" "None yet." "That means you're about to be." I explained the situation. Emily, the development, the easement, the investors. Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he said something interesting. "Langford Capital?" "Yeah." He whistled softly. "That's a serious group." "Good serious or bad serious?" "Expensive serious." He asked me to send the documents. I emailed them that night. The next morning he called back. "Frank," he said, "how much do you trust your future daughter-in-law?" I laughed. "That obvious?" "Very. What did you find?" He cleared his throat. "Well, the deal isn't illegal." That word hung in the air. "But," I asked, "but it's built on assumptions." "What kind?" "Timing assumptions, financing assumptions, construction permits. And if any one of those pieces slips, everything collapses?" "Pretty much." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Does she know that?" Martin chuckled. "Oh, she definitely knows." That afternoon I drove downtown to look at the property. Old habit again. If someone wants to use your land, you should see exactly how. The redevelopment site was a huge empty factory. Windows broken. Weeds growing through the concrete. Construction fencing wrapped around the perimeter. A banner hung on the gate. Carter Urban Development. Future site of River District offices. Carter. Emily's last name. Ambitious indeed. I walked along the fence for a few minutes. Then I crossed the street to my own warehouse. The building looked exactly the same as it had for 30 years. Red brick. Steel doors. Faded company logo still painted on the side. Inside, dust floated through the sunlight coming from high windows. The place smelled like oil and old cardboard. I walked to the back office and sat at the same metal desk I'd used in the 1990s. That's when the second phone call came. Martin again. "You still sitting down?" he asked. "Yeah." "Good." He explained something very interesting. Emily's project timeline assumed that my easement would be approved within 14 days, which meant construction trucks could immediately begin running through my property. But legally, I didn't have to respond for 60 days. And if environmental review became involved, could stretch to 90 days. I started laughing. Not loudly. Just that quiet chuckle older men make when the puzzle pieces finally start fitting together. "Frank," Martin said. "What are you thinking?" "Nothing yet." That tone means something. I'm just learning. 2 days later Daniel came to visit. He looked nervous. "Dad," he said, sitting at the kitchen table. "Emily's really stressed about the deal."
Immagine.
"It's important to her. I can see that." He rubbed his forehead. "She said investors are already committed." "How much?" "About $11 million. I nodded slowly. "That's a lot of pressure." "Yeah." Then he looked at me carefully. "You're not going to block this, are you?" I smiled. "Daniel, I haven't blocked anything yet." He relaxed slightly. But before leaving, he said something that stayed with me. "Emily works really hard," he said. "She just wants to prove herself." I believed him. Ambition can come from good places, but it can also turn people impatient. And impatience is dangerous in business. The next week I kept digging. Quietly. No drama. No accusations. Just phone calls, records, permits, and then something unexpected appeared. A zoning document, buried in the city planning database. A clause requiring stormwater drainage approval before construction access could begin, which meant heavy equipment traffic across my property would require additional engineering review. Another delay, another pressure point, and suddenly Emily's perfect little timeline looked a lot more fragile. That's when I understood something clearly. She hadn't insulted me because she was cruel. She had insulted me because she thought I was irrelevant. An old trucker who didn't understand modern business. People underestimate quiet men all the time. 2 weeks later, Emily called. Her voice was polite, but tighter now. "Frank," she said, "have you reviewed the agreement?" "Yes. And I have a few questions." Pause. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that usually save people a lot of money." She didn't laugh. "So, can we meet again?" "Of course." We scheduled Friday morning. Same conference room, same polished table. But this time, I wouldn't just be listening, because over the last 14 days I had learned something important. Emily's deal didn't just need my signature. It needed my cooperation, my timing, and most importantly, my experience. The same experience she dismissed at dinner. And that meant the game had quietly shifted. She thought she was negotiating with a retired trucker. But what she really had was a 62-year-old man who had survived 40 years of contracts, banks, and investors, and who had just discovered a very interesting detail about her financing structure. A detail that could change everything. Friday morning. 9 a.m. sharp. Same conference room. Same glass walls. Same polished oak table. But the atmosphere felt very different. The first time I sat there, Emily believed she was dealing with a polite retired man who might sign whatever papers were placed in front of him. This time, she knew I had questions. And in business, questions are dangerous. Emily was already in the room when I arrived. Laptop open. 2 thick folders on the table. Coffee cup half empty. Daniel sat beside her, looking like he hadn't slept much. "Morning, Frank," Emily said. Her voice was calm, but the confidence from the restaurant dinner had softened a little. I nodded. "Morning." I sat down slowly and placed my own folder on the table. The one Martin helped me prepare. Emily got straight to the point. "So," she said, sliding the original contract toward me again. "Have you decided about the easement?" I opened the folder, but not the contract. Instead, I pulled out a different document. A city zoning report. I placed it gently on the table. Emily glanced at it. Her eyes paused for half a second. That half second told me everything. "You found it," she said quietly. Daniel looked confused. "Found what?" I tapped the paper. "Stormwater drainage review requirement." Silence filled the room. Daniel blinked. Emily leaned back in her chair. Her fingers folded together. "So," she said slowly, "you did your homework." I smiled. "I used to run trucks through 3 states every day. Homework keeps you out of lawsuits." Daniel turned toward Emily. "What is he talking about?" She sighed softly. "Additional permit review," she said. "How long?" She didn't answer immediately. I did. 45 days minimum. Daniel's face went pale. 45 days? Emily nodded once. The room went quiet again. You could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Because 45 days wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a disaster. Construction financing deadlines. Investor patience. Contractor scheduling. All built around a timeline that assumed immediate access through my property. Card tower. One missing piece. Emily closed her laptop. Then she looked directly at me. "What do you want, Frank?" No sarcasm now. No jokes. Just business. I appreciated that. "Nothing unreasonable," I said. Daniel looked between us nervously. "Can someone explain what's happening?" Emily answered him quietly. If we can't, I leaned forward slightly. This is why rushing deals is dangerous. Emily gave a small humorless laugh. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Not really. That was the truth. Revenge is less exciting than people think. Mostly it just feels like solving a complicated math problem. But she didn't know that. I opened my folder again. This time I pulled out a second document. Emily's eyes narrowed. What's that? A proposal. Daniel looked relieved. A solution? I nodded slowly. Possibly. Emily didn't touch the paper yet. What kind of proposal? Partnership. That word hung in the air. Daniel blinked again. You want to invest? Not exactly. Emily finally reached for the paper. Her eyes scanned the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Her expression changed. First surprise. Then disbelief. Then something close to admiration. You're serious, she said quietly. Very. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. What does it say? Emily read aloud. Conditional easement approval, expedited permit cooperation, in exchange for a 12% equity position in Carter Urban Development's River District project. Daniel stared at me. You want 12% of the project? I nodded. At the current projected valuation of $22 million, Emily added slowly. Daniel did the math in his head. That and Oppo's about $2.5 million. Roughly, I said. Silence again. But this silence felt different. Not tension. Negotiation. Emily tapped the table with her finger. You're asking for a lot. Am I? She leaned forward. You're essentially buying into the project with land access. Yes. Without putting up cash. Correct. Daniel looked overwhelmed. Is this normal? Emily answered him without looking away from me. In real estate development? She gave a small smile. Actually, yes. Then something interesting happened. Emily laughed. Not bitterly. Genuinely. You know, she said, shaking her head. I really underestimated you. Most people do. She studied the proposal again. Did your lawyer draft this? Mostly. And you're serious about cooperating with the permits? Absolutely. Her eyes sharpened. But only if I agree to the equity. Correct. She leaned back in the chair. For the first time since we met, Emily looked thoughtful instead of confident. Frank, she said slowly. If I refuse? I shrugged. Then I take the full 60 days to review the easement. Daniel groaned softly. Emily looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she started laughing again. Well played, she said. Well played. She closed the folder and slid it back toward me. I need to talk to my investors. Of course. She stood up. So did I. Daniel looked exhausted, but also strangely impressed. At the door, Emily turned back toward me. Frank. Yes. Her smile this time was different from the one at the restaurant. Less sharp. More respectful. You do understand real business. I shrugged. Just a little trucking experience. She laughed once more. And then she left the room to make some very uncomfortable phone calls. 2 days later my phone rang. Emily again. Her voice sounded tired, but calm. My investors agreed, she said. 12%. Yes. And the bank. They prefer the deal to collapsing. I smiled. Smart bankers. She exhaled slowly. You realize something, Frank? What's that? You turned my biggest problem into your investment opportunity. Opportunity usually hides inside problems. She paused. And I owe you an apology. I waited. For what I said at dinner. I smiled into the phone. Apology accepted. And just like that, the deal moved forward. But the real twist, the one Emily hadn't seen coming yet, was still ahead. The paperwork took 3 weeks. Lawyers, city offices, investors, engineers. A lot of emails. A lot of signatures. And more than a few uncomfortable conversations. But eventually everything lined up. The easement agreement. The partnership amendment. The updated investor structure. When it was finally done, I officially owned 12% of the River District project. All because of a road across a piece of land I had almost sold 5 years earlier. Funny how life works. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones you almost let go. Construction started in early spring. March 14th. Cold wind, light rain, muddy ground. I stood near the edge of my old warehouse lot and watched the first excavators roll through the new access road. Huge yellow machines. The kind that look like mechanical dinosaurs. Emily stood beside me wearing a hard hat and a bright orange construction vest. She looked exhausted, but satisfied. You know, she said, watching the equipment move. If you had said no, this entire project would have died. I nodded. Probably. She glanced at me. You didn't even hesitate to use that leverage. I shrugged. Business isn't about hesitation. She smirked slightly. Cold. Practical. She laughed. You're dangerous, Frank. Retired men have a lot of free time. The investors weren't thrilled at first. That's normal. Nobody likes surprise equity partners, especially ones who didn't write a check. But once Martin explained the situation clearly, they understood. Because the alternative was simple. No easement. No construction access. No project. Langford Capital actually sent me a very polite letter 2 weeks later. Short. Professional. Mr. Turner, we look forward to working together. That's investor language for, we respect the move. Daniel adjusted slowly to the situation. At first he seemed uncomfortable. One night he came over for dinner and finally said what was on his mind. Dad, did you do this just to prove a point? We were sitting on the back porch. Late evening. Sunset over the trees. I thought about the question for a moment. Then I shook my head. No. Then why? Because the opportunity existed. He frowned. That's it. Mostly. He studied me carefully. And the dinner comment didn't bother you? I smiled. Of course it bothered me. So this was revenge. Not exactly. He looked skeptical. So I explained something important. Revenge is emotional, I said. Strategy is practical. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Still feels a little like revenge. I laughed quietly. Maybe a tiny bit. Over the next 12 months, the project grew quickly. Steel frames, glass walls, office floors, restaurants, parking structure. Every time I visited the site, something new had appeared. Emily ran the operation like a general. Early mornings, late nights, constant phone calls. I began to respect her more than I expected. Ambition is dangerous sometimes, but when combined with intelligence, can build cities. One afternoon in August we stood on the roof of the nearly finished building, 6 stories above the river. Wind blowing hard. Emily handed me a stack of financial reports. Latest projections, she said. I scanned the numbers. Higher leasing demand. Increased property valuation. Construction costs slightly under budget. Then I saw the new estimate. 31 million? I asked. She nodded. Market strong. I did the math in my head. 12% of 31 million. My original road access investment had quietly grown to nearly $3.7 million in value. Emily watched my reaction. You seem calm about that. I've seen numbers before. She laughed. I still can't believe you turned a gravel road into a multi-million-dollar stake. Experience, I said. Not everyone handled the outcome so well. One of Emily's junior partners resigned halfway through the project. Apparently he had argued against giving me equity. Thought it was too generous. He preferred fighting the permit delays instead. The investors disagreed. Construction delays in development projects can cost millions per month. A 12% partner suddenly looked very reasonable. Consequences in business are rarely dramatic. They're usually quiet. People simply disappear from the next meeting. The official opening happened 11 months after construction began. Ribbon cutting, city officials, local news cameras, investors shaking hands and smiling. A large banner across the building entrance read, River District Offices. Emily stood beside Daniel holding giant ceremonial scissors. She looked confident again, but not arrogant. When the crowd began to meaning, more risk, less oversight. She looked at me thoughtfully. You slowed the deal down just enough to make it stronger. I hadn't thought about it that way, but she might have been right. Sometimes resistance forces better decisions. Later that evening Daniel pulled me aside. Emily wants to know something, he said. What? Why you didn't tell her about the stormwater permit right away? I smiled. Because then she wouldn't have learned anything. He laughed. You really are a little ruthless. Only when necessary. The project stabilized quickly. Leasing demand exceeded expectations. By the end of the first year, nearly every office floor was occupied. Technology startups, law firms, marketing companies. The building became one of the most successful redevelopment projects in the district. Langford Capital eventually offered to buy out my share. Their initial proposal, $4.1 million. I didn't accept immediately. Sometimes patience pays twice. And somewhere along the way, Emily stopped calling me Frank. She started calling me something else. Partner. About 18 months after the ribbon cutting, I finally sold my share. Not because I needed the money, mostly because I was curious what it was worth now. Langford Capital had already made 2 offers. The first was $4.1 million. The second was $4.6 million. I waited. Patience is the most underrated skill in business. People rush because they're uncomfortable with silence. Older men get used to silence. So I waited. 3 months later, the third offer arrived. $5.2 million. That's when I called Martin. What do you think? I asked. He laughed into the phone. I think you turned a gravel road into a retirement bonus. Should I take it? If you don't, they'll probably keep raising the price, he said. But $5 million for access land? He paused, then said something I liked. Frank, you didn't sell land. What did I sell? Timing. I smiled. Fair point. So I signed. The wire transfer arrived 2 days later. Just like that, the quiet little easement negotiation had turned into one of the most profitable deals of my life. Not bad for someone who didn't understand real business. A week later Daniel invited me to dinner. Same restaurant, Riverside Grill. Same window table overlooking the river. The 3 of us sat in the same seats as the first time. Only now the atmosphere was different. No tensión. No sharp smiles. Just familiarity. Emily raised her glass halfway through the meal. To Frank, she said. Daniel looked surprised. For what? He asked. Emily smirked slightly. For teaching me the most expensive business lesson I've ever learned. I lifted my glass. And what lesson was that? She didn't hesitate. Never assume experience is outdated. Daniel laughed. That's fair. Emily added one more thing. And never insult the man who owns the road your project needs. That made all 3 of us laugh. Life became quieter after that. I traveled more. Colorado in the summer. Arizona in the winter. Sometimes I drove past the River District building when I was in town. Glass walls reflecting the sun. People walking in and out with laptops and coffee cups. A building full of life. All sitting next to my old brick warehouse. I kept the warehouse. Didn't feel like selling it anymore. Some things are more interesting when you hold on to them. One afternoon Daniel came over with a bottle of bourbon. We sat on the back porch again. Sun setting behind the trees. He poured 2 glasses and said something unexpected. You know, Emily tells that story at business conferences now. What story? The easement deal. I laughed. She makes herself look foolish? Actually, she makes you look terrifying. Terrifying? Her exact words are, never underestimate the quiet guy in the room. I took a sip of bourbon. That's good advice. Daniel nodded. She also says you taught her something about revenge. I raised an eyebrow. What's that? That the best revenge isn't destroying someone. He paused. It's making them respect you. I thought about that for a moment. Then I shook my head. That's not revenge. What is it? Education. Looking back now, the whole thing seems smaller than it felt at the time. A dinner comment, contract, a road. But that's how most turning points work. They hide inside ordinary moments. A sentence someone says too quickly. A detail someone assumes you won't notice. A quiet decision to take your time instead of reacting. People imagine revenge as something dramatic, explosive, loud. In reality, the most effective kind is calm, strategic, patient. You don't yell. You don't fight. You just wait long enough for the opportunity to reveal itself. And when it does, you step forward politely, sign the right papers, and let time do the rest. Sometimes Emily still jokes about that night at Riverside Grill. She says it was the moment she accidentally recruited the most stubborn investor in Iowa. I tell her she's lucky. If I had been 10 years younger, I might have taken the entire project. She laughs every time, but I'm only half joking. These days my mornings are simple. Coffee, newspaper, a slow walk down the road behind my house. Retirement is quieter than business. But occasionally, when the phone rings and someone asks for advice, I remember that dinner conversation. Dad, you don't understand anything about real business. I still smile when I think about it, because the funny thing about business is that the longer you survive in it, the less you feel the need to prove anything. People will reveal themselves eventually. Arrogance always does. Impatience always does. And if you stay calm long enough, opportunity will eventually knock on your door. Sometimes it even asks for your signature. And if you're lucky, it brings a $5 million check with it. Not bad for an old trucker.